All right. Hello, everybody. We're back with our second talk of the day. Right now, we have Matthew MacRae-Bovell, who will be speaking to us about Svelte. And so Matthew is one of the organizers of this event, but is also the VP academic of the Carleton Computer Science Society. So without further ado, I will hand over the torch to Matthew.
Awesome. Thanks, Forrest. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk. Today, I'm going to be introducing you guys to Svelte. So a little bit about me. I don't really consider myself a front-end person. However, I have quite a bit of experience using a lot of the well-known front-end libraries, frameworks, compiler, whatever you'd like to call these new technologies or however you'd like to refer to them. The one I'm most familiar with is likely React. I've used React for a few years now. I've done a few internships where I've, in some kind of full stack or front end capacity, worked with React at several different companies and have come to be familiar with quite a lot of the patterns and a lot of the concepts within React that make React the powerful tool that it is. But in recent times, and I actually gave a talk very recently for the CCSS on why I'm starting to dislike React more and more, have in my attempt to get over these sort of some of the things I dislike about React, I started looking for new tools. And over the last summer, I actually started experimenting with Angular, Vue, and eventually I came upon Svelte, which I'm going to be talking to you today about. So that's really great. So what is Svelte? What is Svelte? Okay, what is it? Svelte, if you've never heard of it before, is essentially another JavaScript UI building tool. So some of you, if you're in first year, maybe have never heard of React, maybe you've never heard of Vue or Angular, any of these technologies. So I'll briefly touch on that. But React, Vue, Angular, these are all the sort of popular standards for building user interfaces on the web these days. At a base level, normally you use JavaScript, CSS, and some HTML to throw together, a simple-looking website. But with more enterprise software, or like, for example, something like Discord, there needs to be some more optimization, how we render the page to the user, or how we display content, and how we optimize for when things should be on the page and stuff like that. And these frameworks like React specifically, I'm going to be going into a bit of the history on it, but Vue, Angular, React all sort of fall into this paradigm of using something called the virtual DOM. And one of the things that's really unique about Svelte that I'm going to be talking about a bit later, as you can see by that, we'll go over some of these features later, note at the bottom of the slide, is that Svelte is newer and also does not utilize the virtual DOM, yet is still very popular and has become very popular within the sort of JavaScript development community. But the reason why I refer to it as just another JavaScript UI building tool is because there's always like a meme in the JavaScript community about how many libraries we all have to learn. So I do promise you that the investment in at least knowing what Svelte is and taking a look at it hopefully will pay off for you. I really do genuinely think this is a tool that for the use case of hackathons and small projects is essentially perfect, and I'm going to be showing you guys why. So first of all, one thing that you might not know, just something I thought was really interesting. These days, React is actually the most popular JavaScript framework these days. So this talk, a lot of it, is going to be a lot of code samples, or I'm going to be showing you the React code sample and the Svelte code sample. I'm going to be trying to show you why I genuinely think that Svelte is more fun than React. But it used to be that everybody would joke about how like, oh, jQuery is, this super popular library. Everybody uses jQuery. Everybody, like we have to deal with it, whatnot. This is the first year, and so just to give again a bit more reference, this graph that we're looking at here, this is the like Stack Overflow developer happiness survey sort of statistics. So it is a bit biased in some vein because those people are all, I guess, using Stack Overflow. But this is the first year that React was the, in quotes, most popular JavaScript library, which is pretty interesting, with jQuery following suit. And you can even see that Svelte is on this list. So that must, that probably means something too. But we'll be sort of comparing React with Svelte quite a bit, because React is sort of like seen as like the front end piece of web technology these days that everyone tells you to learn. And I'm going to be here to try and tell you, maybe consider trying to learn Svelte, even though there are more jobs in React, but I think Svelte is more fun. So in my opinion, I genuinely think that Svelte, and because this is a hackathon, the reason why I want to show you guys Svelte is because I think Svelte is the perfect JavaScript UI building tool for hackathons. And I'm going to be trying to convince this of you today. And the other thing I want to, as I already mentioned, is that in this world, or in 2022, I guess, now that React is on top of jQuery even, everybody is, saying, hey, we need to learn React. I watch a lot of YouTube videos with people, self-teaching themselves like web dev, and a lot of people say something along the lines of like, learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then React, as if that's sort of all you need to know. So people really do hold this like really high, like think that React is super important, and it is definitely, I've definitely been able to pick up Svelte faster because I know React. But I'm here to show you today some of the reasons why I think Svelte is pretty cool, and why it might be a cool I don't know, potential tool for you to try if you have tried out React, or if you're just looking to give something a try for the first time. But basically, I'm here to convince you to give Svelte a try. So number one of the reasons why I think Svelte is a better choice than React, quite frankly, is because Svelte has some really clean and simple syntax. And this doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you really think about it, one of the reasons why, like, for example, a lot of people don't like working in like Java compared to like some of these more modern programming languages that we use these days is because of the developer experience factor, right? So when we look at Svelte, I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of like React code versus Svelte code, and hopefully it becomes obvious that in some vein, I sort of feel that Svelte has a much better developer experience. Obviously, Svelte is newer, so that's sort of hopefully expected, but not every technology is designed with such a good developer experience factor in mind. I really hope I can highlight that. So we're going to look at some Svelte code now, and I'm going to show you kind of how it works. So the example we're looking at on the screen, okay, is what a very simple single file Svelte component would look like. So if you're unfamiliar with the word component, one of the things a lot of these more modern like UI frameworks do is they have this idea of having web components. It lets you essentially what it lets you do is create reusable pieces of your user interface so that you don't have to, copy paste, different HTML over the place like we used to have to do on single HTML files and stuff like that. So what we're looking at here is whenever you make like a .svelte file, that is essentially kind of like a Svelte component. And by default, Svelte components are extremely simple. Svelte components actually, and as you're going to see on the next few slides, are actually modeled after normal HTML instead of having boilerplate like React and Vue and Angular do. So whenever you're trying to learn, if you're trying to learn React, Angular, or Vue, one of the other sort of technologies in the space, one of the things you'd immediately encounter is you'd notice that you'd have to sort of learn how to structure a component for that library or framework, right? You'd have to sort of maybe see a tutorial on how do I add a function to this? How do I store state? How do I put things in the UI, right? And they all have like a sort of way of doing that. With Svelte, every Svelte file essentially works exactly like your standard index.html file would. But that's sort of what it is at face value. It's actually a lot more powerful than that, and I'm going to be showing you that in a second. But as a very simple example here, this simple one-line p tag in this Svelte file essentially gets turned into that hello world on the screen, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I'll go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Svelte files are sort of meant to look like normal like HTML syntax, right? So just like in HTML syntax, you can actually open up style braces, which might seem unintuitive because some of you are going to be like, oh, well, like, why not just use a style sheet? And of course you can use style sheets, but again, this is more to demonstrate the idea that you can open a style bracket on a component, which is not something that I think you would necessarily be able to do in like React or Vue or Angular, because a lot of those frameworks sort of make you think that what you're doing, you're really sort of writing JavaScript that looks like HTML. And that's the same thing that we're kind of doing here. But in this case, it's very much, it looks like HTML. And for that reason, it's a lot easier, I think, for people who've only learned HTML to pick up off the sort of like on a whim, you know what I mean? But as you can see here, we've applied a style and it's applying it to this p tag as you can see. Something that is very interesting though with Svelte, unlike a normal HTML file though, is that styles are scoped to the component that they are on. So let's say I just did, put this style tag on here. You can see that it's actually not affecting the sub-nested component that is on this syntax. So to explain this code a little bit, there are two files here. There's one file, the app.svelte on the left, and then at the very bottom, I have sort of like a one-line nested.svelte file. The point I'm trying to make here is that the style that is on the app file is only being applied to the code that is on app and not being applied to the code that is on nested. And that's kind of an interesting distinction because it allows for you to sort of not have to worry about your cascading style sheets going all over the place. And in a world where maybe you're just trying to prototype something really fast for a hackathon, it might not seem like the best practice. I'm not saying you can't use a style sheet, but this, because it's nested and encapsulated like that, it can maybe make hacking something together really fast and really, really fun. Another thing you can do in Svelte, just like in React, Angular, Vue, is you can pass props, or props is basically short form for properties. So what we're looking at here again is we have two files. We have app.svelte and nested.svelte. And what we're doing is we're passing a value down to the child component, and that is then being rendered on the UI. So again, all of the other frameworks support this, but I just want to show you sort of like what this looks like in Svelte, just to give you the idea that it does support like some of the standard features that you would expect in something like this, and that it is sort of a bit cleaner. The other thing you can see here that is also very interesting is the script tags at the beginning of the file. So as I mentioned before, right, everything sort of is structured to look like an HTML file, but one thing you might find interesting is the fact that there's actually like the word import. So if you run a normal like HTML file, you wouldn't normally be able to just import things, right? Which is kind of strange. So essentially, as soon as you open a script tag on a Svelte file, you can import anything else in your code base, which is really interesting. I just got a comment in the chat asking where these screenshots are from. This IDE is from the Svelte website, has all their code samples. I think they run it in like, I'm going to butcher the company's name, but like Replit or something like that. You can actually run the code live on the Svelte website. So a lot of the code I'm going to be showing you guys today is actually on the like official Svelte documentation. But that is where a lot of these code samples are from. But what's really interesting about, I don't know, this code is you can do full JavaScript imports just like you would in React, Vue, whatever other framework you'd like to talk about, right? And what this means is that, although it does look like an HTML file, and I think some people might have like a stigma towards that because they're going to be like, oh, it's kind of messy, it's not great, I don't like looking at just an HTML file. I'm used to my UI framework type thing, right? I really think that once you see the code sort of in full, you'll realize that this actually looks very clean. And also for those of you who maybe haven't used React before, it's going to be really easy to pick this up because you're going to be used to using script tags. You're going to be used to using that stuff. So as I've said a couple times, in contrast to Svelte, I don't think React code is very fun. And this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to show you some React code versus some Svelte code. And I'm going to show you why I think Svelte is a lot more fun to work with, which doesn't seem like, again, not that big of a deal, but I do really think developer experience matters. And honestly, in my mind, looking at the code samples, I sort of think of almost React as the Java in contrast to React of the front-end world. As, I don't know, that might sound opinionated and weird, but I'm referencing that in terms of Java having syntax that at times can be kind of, I don't know, you have to write 20 lines to print hello world type stuff. So first of all, let's look at how the two contrast in terms of doing conditional rendering. So it's a very common use case in your application that you're going to want to render content conditionally, whether that be something like, how if you display a loading spinner if we're firing a request, or in this case I have this code sample on the right for the Svelte is like, if the person is logged in, display this, versus if they're logged out, display that, right? So just looking at these two examples, React by default models all of its conditional rendering as ternary statements, which again doesn't seem that bad, but I just don't find it's as clean as these very pretty looking if else blocks that Svelte lets you make, which just seem very simple to look at. Sorry, I just looked at a comment in the chat. Someone just said, is there a way to use Svelte with style sheets if we want to? Yes, you can 100% use style sheets. I did not go super in depth on it, but you can even directly use more advanced styling methods, such as using Sass or less within your style, like the actual Svelte files. Svelte will fully handle all that for you. It's really great, but yes, you can use style sheets if you'd like to. I was just sort of giving the like examples of how you could get started at like a very basic level. But yes, React here is modeling conditional running with a ternary. I just find that the ternary doesn't look as pretty as the if statement. I just find that it looks a little janky, and I don't know. I find that, and you're going to see in a second, I find that a lot of React sort of rendering techniques, if you will, don't look as pretty as Svelte's. So here is another example where I think Svelte sort of exceeds React in terms of just making its code look better. Whenever you want to this is an example of how you would display like a list of things. So for example, I don't know, maybe like you want to display like nth many items in a shop, nth many Facebook posts, whatever you like in your app, right? The way you do that in React is you have to use the like .map function, which is, it makes sense because like, that's sort of built into JavaScript, whatever, like it makes sense. But Svelte, on the other hand, has been built to have this like nice little .each block. You know what I mean? I just like how it looks. I think it looks pretty. I think that I'd much rather work with that than I would with the .map function there. And I think the other example I have for you today is how input binding is different between the two. So Svelte has a bunch of these really awesome little I don't know what you'd necessarily, I don't know what they're called, but essentially the equivalent of like event listeners, but they're not really event listeners, but that like bind colon value that you're looking at. So it's a really common feature in like Angular and Vue to have like a lot of built-in helpers for doing really simple things like binding a variable to like a text box. But for whatever reason, React doesn't have that. So one of the reasons why I think Svelte is a really good tool for like hackathons and building personal projects is you don't have to spend a ton of time just hooking up input boxes to like React hooks. I'm going to show you on the next slide what it looks like to do that in React. But as you can see here, this code example right here automatically, if you were to update what's in the text box and those like the two numbers on the right side, would automatically update the UI as soon as you update the text in those boxes, which is really cool. On the other hand, what this looks like in React is something kind of like this. So you'd have an input box, you would put an on change on it, and then you have to like call a hook, which doesn't seem that bad. But when you have to start, I don't know, doing that for like a whole bunch of different inputs, it starts to get kind of cumbersome. Like I just find that having to create the hook, having to put it in the value, having to maybe even use like there's like more than one kind of hook in React. There's like the use ref and the use effect that might come into play, right? I find that having to do all of this just to get this code is essentially equivalent, right? Where the code in Svelte looked much cleaner. There was just some input tags. There was just a script tag clearly showing where the variables were. There was just that p tag with the data. And if you look at the React equivalent, you have to have sort of a lot of boilerplate, right? You have to have the function app. You have to declare your hook, which is the equivalent of declaring a variable, right? But again, you have to sort of be familiar with React to know how that hook works, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Lots of people do know React, but if you're trying to pick this up for the first time, maybe that's a little bit more complicated. But I just find that the React syntax, again, is just bigger. It's the same thing where we complain about Java for taking 20 lines to print hello world. I just think that Svelte does it cleaner in less lines. So the other thing that is one of the big deals, I guess, about Svelte is this idea of it being sort of a compiler instead of using something called the virtual DOM. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the virtual DOM, what that is, and what that actually means. So for those of you who have never really worked with web applications before, essentially the way web applications work, or the way a web page works, is a web page is essentially a tree made up of nodes where the nodes are elements in your page. So you usually will have you'll have a body node, which can have like paragraph nodes and image nodes and link nodes and lots of stuff. And this tree, depending on however many things you have on your page, gets bigger and bigger. So as we started to build more and more complicated software with JavaScript, like it's gotten to a point where, or the reason why we do this in the first place is because every device can run JavaScript, right? Everybody can open Chrome, everybody can do this, right? So we have gotten to the point where we're building more and more software with JavaScript. For example, things like Discord, VS Code, whether they're made with JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever, right? They're all running essentially with JavaScript these days. And when we're doing that, essentially what we're doing is when we're building these bigger pieces of software, they start to become more demanding in terms of the number of nodes they need in the page to work, right? So like Discord has like tons of messages, all your friends are on the side, all that fancy stuff, right? And the problem is the more nodes we put on a page, the slower our application gets, because in order to actually make like state changes in these applications, we have to do a traversal to find those nodes, and therefore the more nodes we actually have on the page, the slower this traversal is. So a lot of what the virtual DOM is, it's essentially a solution to try and fix this problem. But what made React like really well known and stuff, right, is React basically was the first one to implement this idea of the virtual DOM. And what that means, what the DOM, I guess, is, and I forgot to mention this, is it's a document object model. It's essentially the tree structure. What it means to be a virtual DOM is essentially what React does is it only displays the elements that need to be displayed at a given time. And instead of displaying all of the elements, it keeps sort of an in-memory copy of everything that could be displayed, but instead only displays the things that the user needs to see at the current time. And whenever a user makes a state change, like maybe they make a new message, or maybe they like log out, or I don't know, whatever other actions you can do in a web application, right? Once they do those actions, React automatically sort of adjusts what is displayed in the UI based on where the state has changed, and it will take the diff and then put the minimum number of elements back on the page again to minimize the number of elements we need to render stuff. So something though I'd like for you to all keep in mind, there's a comment I put on here, is this is great for enterprise software, right? Like, yeah, cool, React is great and all, but like for most of you who are building small projects, or for like even like small businesses and stuff, like this use case of needing all this isn't necessarily like a requirement, right? So like, yeah, React does all this cool stuff, but like, do you need that? right? Like, do you need it to do all this fancy stuff, right? Because that's really what React is offering. So if you, as like, you know, a student developer, are just trying to build like, you know, a personal website, you're just trying to build your like first web application, you're probably not getting to the use case where you need all this fancy all these fancy page rendering optimizations and stuff, right? So Svelte doesn't have a virtual DOM, but it does have a different strategy for rendering pages and stuff. And I guess some people would argue that that strategy might not be as good for some enterprise software. And I'm not an expert, so I don't want to go outright and say that, but I will say that I think the reason why a lot of people do use React and Vue and Angular is because of this virtual DOM. And one of the factors as to whether people use Svelte might have to do with that aspect of it. So what Svelte does instead is Svelte is sort of called a compiler. To contrast, what React does with its virtual DOM is when you load up a React app in your browser, React basically sends this big bundle of JavaScript to the browser so that React can then can actually do all those virtual DOM operations in the browser. And in order to do that, number one, it has to send a big payload of JavaScript, which is a problem because the bigger your payload, the slower your like initial load time is when you load your web page. And that can affect a lot of things like your SEO score, and like it can just affect the general user experience of your application. Not to say that React isn't fast, but I'm just saying that that's like one of the things that you could bring up in this case. In contrast, Svelte does not send any huge JavaScript bundle to the browser. Instead, what Svelte does is it looks at all your code. It creates it compiles all the Svelte files you make, and it makes this like very little optimum JavaScript package. And then it ships that little tiny JavaScript package to the browser. So although Svelte doesn't have the virtual DOM, it sort of optimizes everything for you beforehand. That's not the best explanation in the world, but that's like the simple explanation. If you want more, you can do your own research on your own time, but that is the general explanation of how it works. So what this means is that you actually get usually a quicker load time on your page because you're not getting this huge JavaScript bundle like you would with React. And you're also getting, with a lot of React apps, you often see like a lot of like single page applications and stuff like that. It still can do single page applications, but it also means that you're also getting like a lot of raw HTML as well. So that can also, not that there aren't ways of improving your SEO score with React, but this sort of Svelte, like some of the stuff you do with Svelte will can have, I guess, an effect on your SEO score and stuff like that. So one big deal with React, again, and it all comes back to this virtual DOM thing, is because of the virtual DOM and the way React has implemented its entire sort of thing to use this virtual DOM, this means that React can only take advantage of stuff within the React ecosystem, because all of the things that React, like anytime you import like maybe a component or like a library into React, it has to make use of the virtual DOM, because otherwise, what's the point? Like there's no point, right? So anything that you want to import into React has to kind of work with React. And the reason why that's kind of bad for like, you know, making hackathon projects, personal projects, stuff like that, is because now you can't just take advantage of the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem. You're forced to work within the confines of things that are only restricted to React, right? Whereas with Svelte, you can literally use any JavaScript thing. And not only that, you can do some really freaky stuff. Not only can you import like any NPM package or whatever with your Svelte thing, you can also, and because it compiles all the JavaScript, and this is like a really unique, and this is going to sound like a bad practice, but you can also combine your NPM packages with like CDN script tags. So I think on the next slide, I have an example of this, and it's not super big, but what this is doing is it's actually, and I should have made this picture a bit bigger so that it was easier to see. But what this is actually doing is this is a Svelte file. And again, I'm really sorry that this is not as like clear as it could be. But what this Svelte file is doing is when this page mounts, it's actually creating a script node on the web page that it loads on, giving that script node a CDN and attaching it to the head of your page, which could seem like a bad practice. But again, if you're, we're building a project for a hackathon and you're just trying to make something work, this could be a really cool and easy way to do some hacky cool stuff. You know what I mean? Like this could be a game changer. You know what I mean? Like you could very quickly prototype some stuff and get some stuff working really quickly. For all you want, you can literally like import jQuery essentially using this method if you'd like. And by the way, this code is not code I wrote. I took this from the official Svelte documentation. So whether it is good code or not, I'm just going to go with I stole it from them. So, it must have been vetted by somebody, but you can do this and you can actually make use of, in this case, this is actually using the MathJax library to render math within the browser. But what this is doing is it's essentially allowing us to use this. I'm actually very familiar with MathJax, so I know that MathJax is kind of a very old dependency, but it's letting us use this old dependency within our new modern Svelte code, and it's letting us kind of quickly make something really awesome, which is really great. Some other cool features that Svelte offers that I just want to throw out there, because again, we're getting close to the time, so this is most of what I wanted to cover to show you guys sort of what Svelte is and what it can do. But a couple other really cool features. This is one I just really like. It lets you automatically inject HTML. Not to say that there isn't something like this for React, but I just really like this because maybe you have like some HTML stored on like the back end. Like it used to be that a lot of people would store like HTML articles, Markdown articles, stuff like that. So it comes with a bunch of these little like, I don't know what they're actually called syntactically, but like @ symbol with like a word next to them that lets you render directly into that thing. So it will let you automatically render like KTeX, LaTeX, HTML, I think even maybe Markdown. I don't know. I haven't checked Markdown, but I do know about like KTeX and LaTeX and stuff like that, which is really nice because I don't know. Let's say you had like some, I don't know, LaTeX code on your server and you just want to render that. You can render that with as simple as one line in Svelte, which has been a huge help for me. And another really cool feature that Svelte has is this ability to inject into the head of your page wherever you want, which doesn't like there's not that many use cases where you can make use of this, but in one thing that you can do, okay, with this example, and this code example isn't reflecting what is on the right side, but let's say you want to do SEO information for different entities for each page. So let's say, for example, what I'm showing on the right side is an example where the SEO information for the CCSS events changes based on the link that's given. So that's like I don't know if you've ever seen on like emails and like on Discord and stuff like that. Sometimes people paste a link and like information will kind of come up previewing the website. So Svelte makes this actually really easy because it lets you inject this unique information from anywhere in your application or any component at any time, which is actually like to me at least it seems like a really great feature for me to work with, because I've I don't know, I might not, maybe I just don't know a good pattern around doing that for a couple other cases, but I generally find that I don't know, it can become a bit difficult to do that at times with some of the other frameworks I've had to work with. So being able to just access and put things into the head from anywhere in the application can be a huge help sometimes, and I think it's a really cool feature that Svelte allows. And again, it's only possible to do that because Svelte is a compiler, and what it really does is it looks at the heads of all of your components and like takes all those heads and like smushes them together when you actually open up the application and stuff like that. Yeah, that was my like very simple introduction to Svelte. I didn't go too in depth on like a lot of the syntactical features of Svelte, but I at least hope I've convinced you that Svelte has some very pretty syntax, is a tool that would be great for personal projects and hackathons, and I hope that maybe you decide to take a look at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Since we are coming up on noon, I am going to recommend that anybody watching the stream go check out Speedfriending. But Matt, I do want you to answer some questions. There's some great ones in the chat, so I'll let you handle that yourself. I'm going to head over and start Speedfriending, but just so we can get the questions as part of the recording, I'll let you handle that.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm just looking at the chat. Robert asks, what's your experience with SvelteKit? Would you recommend it as a way of using Svelte? Honestly, yeah, SvelteKit's cool. I've given it a go. I do like it. I don't like Create React App. The default like thing that you like the default Svelte thing is very similar to like Create React App, where it doesn't come with like a router, or I don't know, it doesn't come with like a lot of pre-built stuff. I remember the developer experience of SvelteKit was really great. I think it had like a pre-built thing that let you automatically like pick the like linting configuration, like TypeScript and stuff like that. Really appreciate that. Especially like coming from like the React world, I didn't realize like how much better the developer experience of like Vue and Angular actually was because they're frameworks. Honestly, SvelteKit's really great. Would recommend. Makes building Svelte apps really easy. The one thing that like maybe people wouldn't like about it, like I would compare SvelteKit to like Next.js. If you're familiar with that, Next.js is kind of like an SSR technology for React. It calls itself like a React framework, I guess, but it has like a very similar. You have to name your files to be in the correct directory kind of thing going on with it. Not necessarily something. I don't know. Maybe if you don't like that, it's not a big deal. But I don't know. I find that kind of annoying sometimes. There's patterns to get around it, so it's not a big deal. But it is what it is. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, I've been playing around with SvelteKit. It's really cool. So does React? The next question is: so does React optimize during runtime while Svelte pre-optimizes? Yeah, basically, Svelte basically like what happens is React kind of like optimizes based on like what things should be on the screen, and Svelte basically what happens is it looks at all your code. Like the actual like Svelte code isn't Svelte code by the time it gets to the browser. It's just like HTML, CSS, JavaScript that has been like optimized and turned into like a bundle, if you will. Same thing. React does the same thing, but like React actually ships. What React does, it ships like a big JavaScript package that lets you use the virtual DOM, if that makes sense. Svelte like doesn't really do that. So if I didn't have, I should have probably included something that shows like the package difference. But the package difference between like React and Svelte and like Angular and Vue, Svelte is like by far the smallest one, which is really cool. But again, I don't really, I don't know. I am coming at this purely from the perspective of like not enterprise software, right? So like the truth is like I just don't think that like if you're building like a personal website, I just don't think that like I just find like React is like unnecessary. You know what I mean? I find that, you know, optimization only really matters when you're working at a certain scale anyways, when it comes to like HTML and CSS and stuff like that. So I just find that the reason why I'm trying to encourage people to use Svelte is because it just has better developer experience overall and should be easier to like buy the idea of people already knowing how like web development works should be easier overall for people to get used to, if that makes sense, because it does look so much like normal HTML. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to recommend everybody head on over to SpeedFriending and you know, obviously the recording for this talk will be available afterwards via the CCSS YouTube recordings. I think YouTube just has to like process them or something like that. But yeah, we will. If there are no more questions, I will recommend everybody head on over to SpeedFriending. As always, thank you guys for coming out to my talk. Happy to have people listen. But yeah, I will recommend that everybody head on over to SpeedFriending.